Continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Samech Bet it is that we're starting today about a person that was not as careful in reciting Kriyat Shema as he should have been. We had the details of it already in the 26 Seifim of Siman Samech Aleph. Now we are going to deal with somebody that didn't do as he was supposed to, was not as careful as he should have. What is the halacha? Afal pishe mitzvah says Maran, even though that it is a mitzvah to be very careful in the words and letters of Shema to be recited properly, kara velo diktek yatsa, as the Gemara says in Masechet Brachot Daf Tetvav Amud Aleph, if you read it without being specific about the details of Kriyat Shema, it doesn't mean that you didn't say a word or a letter. Chas v'shalom. That would not be Yotzeh. But we're talking about a case of Leman Tizkeru, that he were not careful. He said Tizkeru. He is not careful in the pronunciation of Ayin versus Aleph, Chet versus Chaf, or Kuf versus Kaf, and so on. All those details that we mentioned, the person should be careful separating the words that start and stop with the same letter, or mem and afterwards aleph, beginning of the next word. All those details that we discussed in Siman Samech Aleph, those are the things we're speaking about over here. As the Chafetz Chaim writes in Seif Katan Aleph, we're not talking about someone that missed letters, missed words, but we're talking about you didn't separate the words properly from each other, all those details that we mentioned. Now, the Kaf Chaim says even if you did not elongate the dalit, we said not everyone knows how to elongate the dalit with a dalit refuya, right? And if you don't, better not to. Actually, I mentioned to you that I was in a shul publicly, like a lot of people there, and this person sitting right next to me, he thought he was being medaktek at this Gemara of being ma'arich bedalit, and he says Shema Yisrael Hashem Yerachim Hashem Echad. Literally, like out loud, he's saying it like that. Like I had to quietly after the tefillah pull him aside and tell him that's not. You're changing the entire meaning of this. It means nothing. Echad, what's echad? It's dalit refuya, which again, if you know how to do it, you know. If not, you need practice and training before you start doing it for Kriyat Shema. That's the Kaf Chaim adds that's also considered kara velo dikdek beotiotea, and Maran says you're yotzeh. So therefore, you don't have to go back and say it again. Now, even with that, says the Chafetz Chaim, you have to be very careful not to get yourself into that situation, because you want to be medaktek. The Or Letzion says, included in being medaktek is to say it with the proper havara. Now, Chacham Obadia says that if you are a Sephardi that grew up Ashkenazi, he writes that if you said it with the havara Ashkenazi, that's not included in kara velo diktek v'otiyotah. This is your yotzeh. Even the chatchila your yotzeh. If that's the havara that you use, even though that in his shiurim he used to make fun of people who pronounce Ashkenazi pronunciation, that was part of his Sephardi pride, to push for people not to say not to say it in a different havara. And he was actually very strong on pronunciation of Hashem's name, that it should not be done in a way that would change the way things would sound. So therefore, you should be careful. But nevertheless, the Or Letzion writes that this is considered part and parcel of the being medaktek v'otiotea. Therefore, be careful more in the way you pronounce it. Now, says the Mishna Berurah, the Gemara says in Masechet Brachot that we mentioned in Daf Tetvav Amud Bet, a person that's medaktek in otiot of Shema misanenin lo et hageinam. They cool down the Geinam for him. The Chesed Alafim writes in previous Siman, that's Rabbi Eliezer Papa, he says that if a person would know what Sar Chas Shalom of Geinam is, he would be careful his entire life to be so mindful not to miss even one time of reading Kriyat Shema properly with Diktuk, and that is something to be mindful of when a person says the Shema. There's a remez actually that they bring. The Kaf HaChaim says that when you have Shema and Ehad, the Rashi Tevot of Shema and Ehad is Esh, it's fire. So that, of course, represents the passion that the person should have by saying Shema and accepting the Ol Malchut Shamayim, but also he says it represents the Esh of Geinam. That if you're careful in saying Shema, they cool it down. And he says, very interesting, he says, what letters, when you take the Aleph and Shin out, Esh, the fire, what letters are you left with in Shema and Echad? You have Mem, Ayin, Chet, Dalet. Those four is Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Daniel. So those are the four people who were thrown into Esh, literally, right? By Nebuchadnezzar, and the fire was cooled down, and they did not burn. The miracle of Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Daniel was very, very much that. And says the Kaf HaChaim, that's coming to show you that someone that is careful in Shema will be nitzol from Esh, just like these four individuals were saved from the Esh. So says the Kaf HaChaim that you see from the Gemara that says if you are careful in Shema, there will be Mesalen the Geinam. You see the opposite of it also is true, Chas v'Shalom, that if you're not careful, it will not be good news. So says the Shulchan Aruch in Seif Bet, Yachol likrotah, a person is allowed to read the Shema with any language that he knows. Bekol lashon, veizaher midivrei shivush shebeoto lashon. But you should be careful not to distort the words of Shema when you translate it to that specific language. V'daktek bo kemo b'lashon hakodesh, and you should be careful to pronounce it and to say it properly, just as though you would be saying it in Lashon HaKodesh. Now, B'kol Lashon, says the Mishna Berurah, V'davka shemevin bo'oto lashon. That is only true if you understand that language. In other words, if you write it in Chinese and you pronounce all the words in a way that the Chinese person will say, wow, that's amazing, but you have no idea what you're saying, then you're not Yotze. Even though that you said the proper Chinese translation of Shema, or Arabic for that matter, like, for those who speak Farsi, they could read Farsi, they could read Arabic also, it's the same letters. So you read it, but you have no idea what you're saying in Arabic. Or you're saying an Arabic speaking person that is saying it in Farsi, reading the words in Farsi, they have no clue what they're saying in Farsi, but they're reading it, right? Or Latin, which is the same writing, but you don't know what you're saying exactly. So that would not be sufficient. You have to understand the words that you're uttering. Vehu adin b'tfilah b'birkat hamazon. It's not just Shema, by tfilah, by birkat hamazon, kiddush, birkat hamitzvot, perot, halel, all of those things you're yotzeh with any language. And he says, take a look at the Biur Halacha that he discusses a little bit more as a long Biur Halacha over here. He brings actually the Magen Avraham. The Chafetz Chaim brings Magen Avraham in Biur Halacha that only in Kriyat Shema and Birkat Hamazon and Tfilah you have to understand the words that you're saying, but in Kiddush and the rest of Birkat HaMitzvot and Halel, you don't even really have to understand what you're saying. As long as you read it properly, that would be fine. But then the Mishna Berurah very vehemently rejects the Shita of Magen Avraham. And he says that you have to understand it, but the Kaf HaChaim actually sides with the Magen Avraham that in other things short of Kriyat Shema, Tfilah, and Birkat Hamazon, you don't necessarily have to understand the words that are being said, even if you are saying it in Farsi. So, for instance, if you are reading it and it's written in fancy English, art scroll English, and you don't understand some of the words because they're using fancy words. So that's still, if you read it, if it's not Birkat Hamazon, Tefillah, and Shema, other things that you're reading, Hallel, for instance, you would be Yotze. So says the Gemara, says the Mishna Berurah rather, this is only, halachically speaking, the bare minimum. But everybody agrees that the proper way of doing it, mitzvah min hamufchar, would be davka b'lashon hakodesh, to say it in lashon hakodesh. And the reason for that, the Shcharuch later on is going to say in Siman Kuf Aleph that the lashon hakodesh has a segula, has a very specific thing that the other languages do not have. This is a language the world was created with, and so on. This is a language that HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicates with the world, with the Nevi'im, through this language, and the world has been created with it, and so on. And therefore, lechatchila, everyone agrees, says the Kaf HaChaim, that the person should be saying it in Lashon HaKodesh, and he adds also that the setup of the words and letters in Lashon HaKodesh, they have so many different layers of sod, of mystical elements that are there, which when you translate it, you lose all of that. So therefore, all those hints, all of those depths and layers of understanding and remez and pshat and sod, the pardes of the Torah, you lose if you translate it. So says the Kaf HaChaim, be careful to say it properly. Again, this is something that for Baalei Tshuva, sometimes it takes time for them until they get used to reading Hebrew and so on. And, it gives them a push. If they know that this is something very special, it gives an extra reason and incentive to want to actually do it properly. So it says, the Mishna Berurah, ועין בספרי האחרונים, די בימינו אף מצד הדין יש להיזהר שלא לקרותה בלשון אחר, כי בלשון הקודש. Chaim says nowadays you should say it בלשון הקודש anyways, כי יש כמה וכמה תיבות, because there are so many words, שאין אנו יודעים איך להעתיקם היטב. We don't know how to translate them well. Right? This is already, the Gemara in Megillah speaks about achashtar pnei HaMelech, achashtaranim, bnei haramachim. We don't know what they really mean. Right? How do you translate things that we don't necessarily know exactly how to teach and to translate? So therefore, says the Mishna Berurah, many Achronim side with the fact that nowadays you should say it in Lashon HaKodesh because of this one problem. For instance, he says, Kekon, Tevat v'shinantam, when you say v'shinantam levanecha, how do you translate the shinantam? It's machloket mefarshim in the Rishonim already. Kama v'kama biurim. So many different translations and explanations have been given in the word of the shinantam. One of them is language of limud. You should teach it, learn it together with your children. One of them is lashon chidud, which is different. They should be sharp in them. You should know them so well that it's sharp and ready. Many other words, we don't even know what they mean exactly, right? These are things that in the Gemara sometimes is a question and it's not so clear. When you say it in Lashon HaKodesh, in the original language has been given, then of course you're set. You don't have to be concerned. And he ends up saying, even if you don't understand Lashon HaKodesh, you say it in Lashon HaKodesh, you're Yotze regardless. Now, if a person does not understand Lashon HaKodesh, can he listen to somebody else and be Yotze? That's a machloket. In other words, if I'm saying the Shema myself, if I'm saying the bracha Birkat Hamazon myself, the brachot myself, fine. Then you're Yotze. That's no problem. Even though you don't understand the words, but you said the words, you uttered the words, so you said you're Yotze. But how about if I'm not saying the words and I don't understand the words? You're saying it for me, it's Shomea Ke'oneh, and I don't understand Lashon HaKodesh. I don't understand Hebrew. So is that good enough? So this is something that in Chot Tfilah, in Siman Kuf Chaf Daled, Mishna Berurah is going to have in Arichud. We're going to discuss that more at length. And there's also a discussion whether or not it's better to say Lashon HaKodesh yourself when you don't understand, you have no clue what you're saying, but you're saying it in the original language, you're saying it in Lashon HaKodesh. Is it better to do that or to read it in English when you understand exactly what you're saying? And that also, the Biur Halacha later on in Siman Kuf Aleph, we're going to have that discussion with Zat Hashem. So we're going to hold off to these discussions because the Chol Kriyat Shema and Tfilah really are, they share a lot of elements that one of them is discussed here, one of them is discussed there. So we put the full picture together as we go through the Simanim of these halachot, Be'ezrat Hashem. So says Maran, in Seif Gimel, Sarich la'ashmiya le'ozno ma shemotzi befiv. You must hear what you say yourself, at least. You don't have to yell it out loud, but at the very least, you should hear yourself what you're saying. But if you didn't, as long as you verbalized with your lips, you lipped the words basically, and you verbalized it, you're yotze b'di'evet. So lechatchila, your ears should hear what you're saying. So you don't have to say it out loud, but loud enough that you hear. That's lechatchila. If you didn't, as long as you verbalized it with your lips, it's not just a thought that you were looking at the words and thinking of the words, but you actually lipped the words, you're yotze. The Rama adds, ve'af lechatchila yaseh ken im hu b'makom sheno naki legamri. And the Rama writes, if you're in a place that it's not clean, and he can't clean the place because of onus. For instance, imagine a person that's in a jail cell. You have a bathroom or whatnot. Then you should just think of the words in your heart. But that's maybe the jail cell is not a good example because that's could be actually metunaf. We're talking about a place that's not for sure dirty. If you have a place that's dirty, you can't even be meharher, you can't even think of divrei Torah. So it's not a makom that's metunaf, so you could be meharher, you could think of divrei Torah there. The asur leharher b'divrei Torah. If you're in a completely dirty place, then it's asur to even think of divrei Torah, and therefore Rama says you have scenarios in which you will think of it, but not say the words. The Chafetz Chaim brings that you have to say the words is midrabanan. The Bach says it's midrabanan, that you have to actually hear your words that you say. Shema hashma lo znecha ma she'ata motzeh mepicha. That is midrabanan, but the Ravad holds, and it's brought in the Rashba, that this is actually Doraita. It's a full-fledged drasha. He understands the Gemara is telling you a full-fledged drasha that Shema means hear. And here means exactly what it means. You have to hear the words of Shema that you say. So it is something to be taken seriously. Lashmiya le'ozno, b'kriyat Shema v'hu adin b'birchotea, says the Mishna Berurah, not only in Kriyat Shema, but also in Birkat Kriyat Shema, a person should be mindful of those halachot as well. The person that's reading it out loud, that he could hear it himself, but he actually doesn't hear it because there's so much noise that basically completely drowns the voice of himself. You're in a tzibur, everyone's saying, yelling it, and therefore you don't hear yourself because there's so much background noise. Or you're in a chatuna. Chatuna, you want to repeat Kriyat Shema because you davened Arvit early or whatnot, and there's the blasting music that makes every healthy person deaf. So you're trying to say Kriyat Shema, you're saying it out loud, but you hear nothing. But if you turn off the music, you will be hearing yourself. So it's loud enough that a person could hear, but you're in actuality not hearing it. The Kaf Chaim says that he's mesupak. He says it's not so clear to him if you actually are yotze. In other words, does it have to be a voice that is enough to be heard, loud enough to be heard, if you have the proper setting, or you actually have to hear yourself, regardless of how loud the surrounding are. And he basically leaves it as, he says, L'chatchila should be machmir. He's mesupak about this. And therefore, he says, L'chatchila, you should actually hear yourself, regardless of the setting that you find yourself in. And a person that is, shalom, deaf but not mute, so he can't hear, that we're going to discuss in Siman Ayin, B'ezrat Hashem, upcoming very soon. And when you say Baruch Shem Kivud Malchuto, even though that we say you have to say Baruch Shem Kivud Malchuto b'chashai, you should say it in a low tone, a low voice. The Ben Ish Chai says at the end of the day you have to at least hear it yourself. Even Baruch Shem, you should hear yourself, says the Ben Ish Chai. So that's also another thing to be mindful, to be careful about. It says the Mishna Berurah, last piece over here, ubilvad, avalim hirher belibo, if you thought it in your heart, in your mind, lo yatsa, then you're not yotze. You have to at least lip the words. As we said, the thought by itself, machshava, is not like dibur, and therefore, hirhur lav kedibur damin, and therefore you're not going to be yotze, on which the Kaf HaChaim writes that if you hear but you don't talk, right? If a person, chas v'shalom, is mute but it's not deaf, the Kaf HaChaim writes, if he hears the Kriyat Shema from other people and he has kavanah to be yotze, and other people have kavanah to be motze him, he is yotze, and that's what he should do. That's the best way he should say, because he can't talk, he can't verbalize the words properly, so he should hear it from other people and have kavanah to be yotze, and that's the way would be best for him. B'ezrat Hashem will continue on Seif Dalit in the days to come.